Okay, simple summary for this week. I'm going to try to keep it short, but this is a complicated, dense event. I'm going to try to make it simple and summarize it. Here we go. The Cuban Missile Crisis. This occurred in October of 1962 during the time in which John F. Kennedy was president, and it is generally understood to be the time in which the world came closest to a nuclear war, to a full-scale nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union that could have essentially ended life on Earth as we know it. So, we're not talking about the price of grain in 1882 here. So the basic story is this. During the Cold War, the United States had nuclear missiles in Europe, stationed in the countries that were its allies to protect those countries from a potential invasion by the Russians, by the Soviet Union. And so there were missiles that were relatively close to Russia, and they naturally felt threatened by that. They had an ally in the nation of Cuba, which is 90 miles off the coast of Florida. And so in the summer of 1962, quietly, the Soviet Union, the Russians, placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. And those missiles had what were called first strike capability. This is the sort of thing where they could launch at Washington or New York or, any major city, and you'd only have a few minutes warning. And this was done quietly, and the United States did not know about it. And in fact, the Soviet Union diplomatically told the United States, we wouldn't do anything like this. Nothing's like that. We're good. Don't worry. No problem. In October, the United States intelligence services discovered that this had happened. There were surveillance photos from planes flying overhead, making it pretty clear that the Soviets had put offensive nuclear missiles in Cuba. This was brought to the President Kennedy's attention in the White House one morning when he was still, in his bedroom reading a newspaper in his bathroom, apparently. The National Security Advisor, a man named McGeorge Bundy, came in and told him about this. And he immediately convened all of his senior people. He did it very quietly. He did not want anybody to know about this. He didn't want to start a panic. He didn't want the Russians to know that the American government knew about it. One of the first things he said was, get Bobby. And what that means is Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States, President Kennedy's younger brother, and yes, if you're wondering, the father of the current official in the Trump administration. That was his closest advisor. Even though the Attorney General doesn't have anything to do with foreign policy, technically, he wanted people he trusted, and he trusted his brother. And so this group convenes, and they're studying what to do, and essentially the military, the president's military advisors are like, you got to go in, you got to bomb this stuff. You got to bomb it to oblivion and take it out before these missiles become active, because that's the only way to guarantee the safety and security of the United States. And at first it seemed as if that's what they were going to do. And there's a lot of this stuff has been recorded, and you can hear the president say, well, we're certainly going to bomb, but we have to figure this out, etc. Again, I'm taking a very complicated event and distilling it down to a few minutes. If you're interested, there's a movie called 13 Days that dramatizes this very well. Here's the problem with bombing the Russian nuclear missile sites. First of all, you're going to kill Russians. That means they're going to have to respond in some way. How might they respond? Are they going to move on Berlin? What are they going to do? They're going to do something. They're not going to let you kill their soldiers and sailors, right? So that's number one. And you can live with that if they've started something, I suppose. But here's the real problem. When President Kennedy said, can we take out all of these missile sites if we bomb them? The answer was, we can take out all of the missile sites that we know about. You see the problem there? You bomb these Russian nuclear missile sites in Cuba, and you don't get all of them. you might provoke them into launching the very missiles that you are trying to destroy. You get all of them but one, and they don't, and then Russians launch that at Washington or New York City or wherever. That's World War III. You're trying to prevent World War III, not cause it. So the president resisted this option. And he was under enormous pressure from the military. Like, we got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. And but at the end of the day, he's the president, he's the commander in chief. And even though he was young, he was only, let's see, how old was he in 1962? I guess he was about 45. In a relatively inexperienced commander in chief. This is Eisenhower. This isn't Eisenhower, And so they thought they could push him around, but they were wrong. So what he decided to do was this. When he was ready to make it public, he arranged for speaking time on television. And this is back when there's only like 3 channels, not a million, and people watched the same thing. You watched one of those 3 channels. And so if the president came on TV, it was kind of a big deal. And so the press secretary, Pierre Salinger, made an announcement that the president would speak that night on television on a, quote, matter of the highest national urgency. I'm actually paraphrasing that. That's not a quote. And people were like, what? Just naturally nervous, and they should be. And he goes on television, and he basically lays it out that the United States has learned that the Soviet Union, the Russians, have put nuclear missiles in Cuba, and this is unacceptable. And it will be the policy of the United States to regard any missile launched from Cuba as an attack by the Soviet Union upon the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response by the United States. Meaning, anybody fires a missile, we're launching all our stuff at the Soviet Union. You're not going to push this off on other people. This is you, and we know it's you. And this scared the hell out of people, right? People started. He did it calmly, and he told people to be calm, but he also warned people that we could be heading for war, and so it did cause a lot of concern. There were a lot of people going to grocery stores and buying up a bunch of food, and this is silly, but some people had tried to create bomb shelters under their homes in case, because there had been fears of nuclear war for several years, for more than a decade. Now, I don't really think like digging a shelter in your basement is going to hold off a nuclear bomb, but okay. Do what you got to do, I guess. When I was a kid, and this is in the 80s, we still occasionally practiced like a drill where you duck underneath your desk in school, because I'm sure that plywood right above my head is going to protect me from a thermonuclear blast. But, this is as much psychological coping with the stress as actual preparation for something. So the Russians denied this at the United Nations, and there was a big showdown. And basically this got settled, and the reason that we're sitting here today and there wasn't World War III is this got settled quietly behind the scenes. The president sent his brother Bobby to see the Russian ambassador because they were friendly. These were people who had they chatted. They weren't friendly, but as friendly as you can be with a Russian ambassador in 1962. Like, they exchanged. The Russian ambassador, a man named Dobrynin, had admired a painting that one of Bobby's kids had made, and said, "Oh, why don't you take it?" I'm sure they would be honored. Now I'm wondering if that painting was by Bobby Jr., but I guess it doesn't matter. Anyway, he went to the Russian ambassador and he told him, "Look, we would like to find a peaceful solution to this, but we cannot let these missile sites become operational, and so there's gonna be." In the next couple of days, something's going to happen unless we can fix this. And what he's basically telling him is, we need to come to a diplomatic solution, or the United States is going to have to bomb these sites. And again, you bomb this, they're going to bomb something back. And you move here, they're going to move there, and next thing you know, you've got a World War III. You got nuclear war. We don't know exactly what happened, but Ambassador Dobrynin did take the message back to the Soviet leader, a man named Khrushchev. and there were teletype communications, which is like a primitive form of, there was no phone. You couldn't just pick up the phone and call, you know, like some red phone that you see in the movies. That didn't exist. But the word got out between the two, and essentially the Russians backed off. They said, okay, fine, we're gonna withdraw the missiles. And Kennedy realized at that moment that the world wasn't going to end that day, and he went out of his way to avoid embarrassing the Russians. He's like, let's not gloat, let them, you know, let's not embarrass them. Just, you know, we've got the solution that we want. And the crisis came to an end, and things went back to normal. But there was a period of time there where the American people were justifiably very frightened. And in fact, the people in the government were like, for instance, Robert Kennedy's family. As Attorney General, Robert Kennedy would have been evacuated if there was a missile launch along with the president and taken to a secure location, wherever that might be, depending on where you were. But what about his family? What about his wife and his, whatever it was, 8 or 9 children? No. So nobody was living through this thing calmly. So that's the basic story of it. Summarize that. Try to put as many details as you can. Make sure that you're writing this in a way that tells me you watched this video and that you understand what we're talking about. I don't want to see stuff from other places that doesn't show me that you did the assignment. So just repeat back essentially what I said and answer the questions. Okay.